Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm David Bloom, co-founder of Next TMT, here with my co-founder, Daniel Frankel, talking all things technology, media, and telecom. Right, that one, telecom. And lots going on this week. I got back from Europe, which was sublime, but kicked my butt. Lots happening. Should Disney dump its broadcasting operation with ABC? Don't sell them, but dump them to get the FCC off its back.
That's what I'd be
Meanwhile,
saying.
Disney's sneaked in a across-the-board fee hike for its streaming products. In related news, Trump, Daniel suggests, may have overreached in his attempts to take over TV. I took a look at the fastest growing little corner of entertainment, micro dramas or verticals. The NFL wants to stir things up by renegotiating its contracts a year early, let the angst explode. Dan has some thoughts on the painful documentary about AKA Charlie Sheen, but he also has some thoughts about One Battle After Another, a possible classic from the
I
great
saw it. Wow.
San Fernando Valley director Paul Thomas Anderson. That PTA, not the other PTA. Getting lots of hosannas, so we'll talk about that. Speaking of little films that might have a chance to do okay in the box office, Avatar 2, which ran up about $2.3 billion, is going to be back in theaters this week and ahead of December 19th release of Avatar 3. We'll speculate how many zillions that might make for Disney and whether it can save a really sorry-ass box office this year. Anyway, let's get started, Dan. Lots happening in and around sort of the fallout of the Jimmy Kimmel stuff. I mean, I do want to say, and just a minor aside, I know you have been grappling with some health issues, and I got my butt kicked in the 21-hour transition from our apartment in the heart of Paris to our apartment in the heart of Santa Monica, two very different places. And I feel a little bit like Case Pollard, the Cool Hunter, in William Gibson's Blue Ant trilogy in the first book, Pattern Hunter. Case has a theory about jet lag, which is that when we fly long distances, our soul has to walk and it takes a while to catch up. And that's why we feel this disconnection and dislocation and all that stuff. For what it's worth, Gibson's working now with Morten Tildum, the great Norwegian director, on a film adaptation of pattern recognition, which I'm greatly looking forward to. Tildum's a guy that did the wonderful Imitation Game about Alan Turing and the Enigma code breaking operations in England during World War II. But let's get to the meaty stuff here. We've got Disney being recommended by our friend Laura Martin and her colleague Dan Medina over at Needham Securities. Just get out of broadcast, she says. Don't sell them because then you're back on the hook with the FCC. But given the uncertainty, given the fast changing realities, generative AI, just dump the broadcasting operation. It's a tiny portion of the value of Disney as a whole, and run everything on Hulu and the ABC app. And then watch Nextstar and Sinclair figure out how much their local broadcast anchors can fill for the day. What do you think about this suggestion? I think it's mostly a thought exercise, but I think it's really interesting to ponder.
I've been saying this for a while, ever since the Brendan Carr administration reared its head. And I mean, it's taken a pretty aggressive agenda from the very beginning. It launched all sorts of investigations back in February. And I know your broadcast is a hardy bunch and there's a lot of pride there and there's certainly a legacy. But at the end of the day, does it matter? If there's another medium that's sort of displacing it, why not just go there? I know there's all
Get
sorts of
ahead of the game, basically. Are you saying just get ahead of things?
reverse retransmission and all sorts of ways that people make money doing broadcasts. But I mean, Martin's math they know what they're doing. It seems like a win. I mean, you have the
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah. We include the numbers in the. I mean, it's definitely worth digging into her note that they put out. But I think I was really struck ultimately by the really tiny contribution that broadcasting for decades, the cash cow of American media, now makes to a very large company in Disney. She suggests that even if you write off $1.5 billion or $4 billion in free cash flow for a year, for a decade, and you take some one-time hits, 1.5 to 2.5 billion, that's like less than 1% of damage to Disney's market value. And the
Yeah, that's been
market,
going on for a while. I mean, and then in the aughts, we had the media networks, the cable networks, and everybody was in awe at how much revenue was sort of swelling into their ranks. And broadcasting has been giving way to one medium or another for quite a while.
Right. I got a little bit, I did a separate longer takeout on this for Forbes. People can dive into if they want to. But one of the things I mentioned, a little history lesson, ABC's connection to Disney goes back to the 50s when Leonard Goldenson took over the company from a candy executive and needed programming. His competition was CBS and NBC, and they came out of radio. So they had sort of ready-made stars like Bob Hope over at NBC. He didn't have anything, right? And so he's looking around for content, and the Hollywood movie studios are like, "Screw you, we think TV's awful, it's beneath us." Except for one little studio, little animation studio called Walt Disney, that had a nice little library of animated shorts and features and nature documentaries sitting on the shelf, and also a need because Walt needed to pay for Disneyland, which was one of the most interesting stories in 1950s media. I strongly recommend people look up. And then fast forward 30 years, and Michael Eisner buys Cap Cities ABC, one of whose senior executives is a former weatherman you may have heard of named Bob Iger. And Iger spent 22 years with ABC before Disney bought it. And now he spent nearly as much time as CEO with the whole Disney. But, it might make a lot of sense. I wonder if he could let go of that thing he grew up in. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, he's not letting it go. I mean, it would be a brand on Hulu.
Yeah, it'd be a brand on Hulu. And Hulu is going to be a brand melting into Disney Plus. And perhaps that's one of the ways they get more content onto Disney Plus to make it worth what the Lightshed guys put in a report is, quote, meaningfully overpriced compared to Netflix's engagement and value provided for its viewers. I mean, it's several dollars more now. And they're just saying, this doesn't make, this is a rip. They're going to have to make more content and really demonstrate some value here. So I'll be interested to see how they do that.
So, let's talk about PTA, the Valley Boy.
You want to talk about PTA because you went to go see it? You did one of your little jaunts to a theater sitting by yourself. How full was the theater? Because PTA's beloved in this town. No doubt about that.
It was a mile away. Crenshaw Cinema. And it was packed like I haven't seen it. It was a weekend. But I haven't experienced a movie where people applauded and there was like energy and since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was the last time I had that kind of experience in the theater. And that was just before the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, PTA is certainly in the class with Tarantino in that generation of, I think really important filmmakers. So I guess in some ways it doesn't surprise me. Leonardo DiCaprio plays a washed out former sort of revolutionary who's continuing fighting battles of some kind, tilting at windmills, it feels like, more than anything. But
I would encourage everyone to read Owen Gleiberman's review in Variety, which got picked up by Trudge and other outlets. It kind of hits it right on the head. I mean, it's really an on-the-nose movie. It's a near-term future where there's a mass deportation of immigrants and a very strident anti-immigrant sentiments and a revolution going on. And it's about, a revolutionary family. DiCaprio kind of plays, a Lebowski kind of guy who stumbles through it. But, very
does he drink White Russians?
He does not drink a lot. He smokes a lot.
Man. He smokes a lot of pot or what?
I don't want to spoil this with us. See this movie.
All right, but you liked it, and PTA makes great movies. Magnolia, for instance, is one of my all-time favorites. I used to live 2 blocks from Magnolia Boulevard, which strips across the belly of the San Fernando Valley, and that's what inspired him in that, multi-character, opus. So I'm looking forward to seeing it at some point soon.
I love There Will Be Blood, and to me it was better. So
yeah, a lot of people like There Will Be Blood. I'm squeamish at the sight of blood and oil, which is why Landman makes me so uncomfortable. But that being said, you also suggest in the newsletter that Trump may have overreached in his attempts to take over TV. Now, why do you think that?
That was actually Esquire who suggested that. Let me back up. He overreached in terms of the broadcast kerfuffle around Kimmel. I mean, he didn't factor in, obviously, that was just a suspension that Disney left, and the ability to walk itself back. And in the end, Disney looks a little wishy-washy. Its investors or some of them are asking for an update on what happened. Nexstar and Sinclair don't look particularly good. They backed up too and allowed Kimmel back on the air. Certainly, Brendan Carr, who was skewered on South Park last week, looks ridiculous. Kimmel comes out looking good. I thought he was a pretty magnanimous return to the television airwaves. And YouTube ended up looking really good. Garnered, I think, over 20,000 or 20 million views, dwarfed what the activity on ABC. So all this did was demonstrate the connected TV strength of YouTube, I think.
It's interesting because I think that YouTube got to harvest some of the value of that huge audience. It was 4x a normal Tuesday night.
So Esquire
did not.
The story that, well, now Trump is losing in TV. Well, he simultaneously claims he carved that deal out with Chinese president to take over TikTok, or have Rupert Murdoch, Michael Dell, and Larry Ellison take over TikTok, his conservative friends.
Well, Ellison's had a piece of TikTok for 3 or 4 years now, I think, going back to the first Trump administration, because Oracle was providing the technology back end. But it might be a bigger role. You roll that into Paramount, Skydance, and maybe they pick up a random Warner Brothers operation, and you're talking about some really interesting and I think possibly problematic media concentration. So
yeah, who knows? I mean, it's Trump's word, but it describes a kind of majority stake for his three friends and control of the platform. And with 15% of Americans getting their news from TikTok, obviously there's more messaging control there. So
right, I thought it was actually higher than that, at least with younger users who dominate on TikTok. It's closer to 40%, which is heartwarming, I think. It's like we need to get over there real quick, boyo, and start doing like minute-long takes on high and medium frequency splits and the value of those things for big cable. Since you hurt me by writing about that this week, would you explain why it matters to our beloved listeners?
Well, I didn't hurt you, or did it make you cry?
I was wounded.
I kept it short. Cable, which has been reeling from competition from fierce wireless, fixed wireless access, cell phone internet, basically. Cheap internet from the cell phone companies, and fiber to the home, which is really good, really fast. It's symmetrical, so if you get 200 megabits downstream, you also get it upstream.
Yeah, and it goes up at 200 also. Yeah, and that's the problem because it's always been asymmetrical a lot with the cable companies. It's like, well, you can send your little card that says you're David Bloom, but you can't actually send video up or play a video game at 70 frames per second on 4 megabits of connectivity. So
the cable guys who offer expensive internet are kind of bringing a value proposition now. Early returns from what are called mid-split and high-split maneuvers, where they basically allocate more spectrum to the upstream. And with video gaming, video conferencing becoming more and more proliferate, that matters. So
yeah, well, video conferencing, I mean, it is still amazing to me 5 years after the pandemic, the number of people who go, how do you use this Zoom thing again? It's like, really? What did you do for 9 months? Did you talk to anybody? Did you see any face?
Ookla, the research company, did a download on it. It's early innings, like New York and Los Angeles, which are controlled by Charter. They don't have, or parts of it are. We don't have that network upgrade yet, but we will. The Charter still has 85% of the country to go. Comcast, is, in addition to doing network splits, is rolling out a brand new technology called DOCSIS 4.0. All the major cable players are doing some kind of significant upgrade to their networks. They want you back. So that was the story.
Sorry, I want you back. It could be a Michael Jackson song. I want you back. But, actually providing more connectivity now that we have a fast shifting set of consumption patterns and content creation patterns, I think is really interesting. And how they compete, how well they compete against some of the other players, I think will be fascinating to watch. Frontier's been banging on our door I don't know what they were doing while we were gone, but they weren't reaching us. But I know before that they were putting in their fiber to the home, and other folks are, I'm sure, doing much the same
This
thing.
is in Santa
So
Monica?
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Frontier trucks all over. So, or they were 6 weeks ago. So there's that. I spent some time, despite being bleary eyed from the trip back from Paris. This is, by the way, sunset in Paris from a friend's really fantastic apartment.
God, your soul's walking there.
My soul is still walking back, and I might say strolling, like a flaneur, as they call them, probably stopping at a couple sidewalk cafes in New York and having a demi-tasse of café crème, the bastard, wandering on through. But that being said, I spent some time on Friday. I roused myself for the third day of the LA Vertical Market, or Vertical Drama Market, which was a first ever little project tucked away in a sprawling but seemingly kind of empty post production facility in East Hollywood on a side street. And, there were dozens of people either making, distributing, or wanting to figure out how to do micro dramas, which are huge in China, perhaps an $8 billion market there, according to people I talked with at the show. And it's already probably going to be over $1 billion this year here. These have micro budgets, maybe 100,000. They churn these things out. It uses an economic model that's very similar to mobile games, which is not surprising because it came out of the mobile business in China, which is huge, free to play, but you buy little bits of stuff. Well, here you're buying the next little episode.
This is something different. I thought the Koreans, they were doing these short form dramas.
They do webtoons, different thing, a little bit longer form. This is a totally different thing. It's really an interesting writing challenge because you have to create a cliffhanger every couple of minutes to get somebody to get the next one and the next one. And like an 80-minute show might have 50 episodes and they're pulling off, 99 cents. On your phone, you're just like, sure, boom, whatever. And you look up, 3 weeks later and your phone bill's a little bigger than it was when you started. But you found out what happened to that secret billionaire boyfriend. So there's that. The really interesting thing is right now the market is pretty heavily concentrated in over 35 housewife women in the Midwest with these romances that are actually kind of chaste, like, Lifetime and Hallmark kinds of stuff. I also talked with Eric Opeka, the number 2 over at Cineverse, and they just cut a deal with Lloyd Braun's Banyan Ventures to create a joint venture that will start churning out some of this stuff. They have a background, among other things, in horror, and you could imagine some of this stuff in horror tied to their website, Bloody Disgusting, and their Screambox streaming service. You start layering some of this stuff in there and you've got more engagement, more relationships. So I'll be really interested to see and they don't have to deal with union signatory limitations on being involved in non-union projects, unlike the big studios, which have been very cautious. Big shock.
This has a toehold Middle America?
Yes. It has a toehold in Middle America. It has a toehold because it's a little thing that doesn't cost very much per byte. It's on your phone. You can watch a few of these things or watch them while you're doing whatever else. I actually think there's some really interesting businesses here. Why wouldn't you do like romantic comedies with kind of steamier though, a little more sexual than the ones that they sell in this sort of core market on sites like Bumble and Hinge, right? As a way to keep people more engaged in these dating services that have really seen a big drop in their use times. But if you have some things like this, it starts to be a little bit like Netflix with its video game stuff, right? It's another reason to stick around, and you can do that while you're paging through. So I find that really interesting as something that's coming up. And then the people there are saying, like Eric Opeka said, this feels a lot like 2016 when he and Tony Weedor, our friend, were who's also at Cineverse and is the head of technology for them, were trying to figure out fasts, and they were launching channels, and they had no idea what the business model was or what the audience was or any of that stuff, but they were throwing stuff up there, seeing what stuck. And this is that now, 8 years later. So something to watch, I think. So, hey, speaking of which, something to watch, you got to see PTA at the height of his powers. You got to also see Charlie Sheen not at the height of his powers in a documentary called AKA Charlie Sheen. What'd you think about that?
I gotta say, I mean, I've been convalescing myself, but I've been under the weather.
Watching Charlie Sheen is like healing for you?
everybody's got the friend who tells her like their wild party stories. Charlie Sheen delivers. It's just like, he talks about the first time he used crack cocaine, and this very attractive girl that he's kind of has been seeing, but he rescues her from the den of some dealer or something, and she introduces him. Sure, you've been snorting it, but try smoking it. And he's reluctant at first, and then she throws in, well, let me give you fellatio. Why do you smoke cocaine?
How did I know oral sex was going to be involved in this?
It's just like the life of Charlie Sheen. Anyway, just all this stuff. Yeah, so they offered me Karate Kid. He could have had Ralph Macchio's role. His dad, he had some other like sequel he was shooting in the Boondocks, and his dad made him keep his word and live up to that contract. And he was resentful for a while, and then Platoon comes along. He just lived this incredibly charmed life. It's really
that he's still here is absolutely evidence of an incredibly charmed life.
Well, I did want to appears like his dad, long suffering, who tried to famously bring him through a lot of.
Well, Martin had his own demons. I think it's important to say Martin had his own challenges with some substances over the years, and I think Emilio, his brother, did too. I could be wrong, and I apologize if I am.
Well, the first 5 minutes, John Cryer, his Two and a Half Men co-star, comes on and says, "Listen, here's the pattern. We love Charlie. He cleans up. He gets on a roll again. He tears it all down. Starts in it. So I don't know. We're part of a cycle we might be on. So that's like the first 5 minutes. You're like, okay, I could be adulating over this sort of reclaimed movie star right before he relapses. I hope he doesn't. I mean, but there doesn't seem to be any warmth between.
There's no guardrails there, for instance. And no, it doesn't sound like from what you were saying, there's a lot of hope that he'll be able to avoid another relapse any day now.
But he's a charismatic documentary subject. I'll give him that. Anyway.
Well, he's a charismatic guy. That's part of his problem. Charlie he's got it. Whatever it is, he's got it. Right?
So I go to bed on Friday night on a high. I'm getting ready. I'm going to watch Big Noon Kickoff on Fox. My Trojans are traveling to Illinois, and it was an excuse. Oh my God, Fox is not a place to watch your favorite sport.
Well, now you tell us. Great, thanks for that. Hey, listen, I don't want to lose track. We were talking about PTA having another all-timer, but Roy Price, who used to be the head of streaming over at Amazon, he was sort of their first guy who got him into a lot of prestige stuff that was actually quite great. Man in the High Castle and Transparent and some other things that won a lot of Emmys, but didn't satisfy Jeff Bezos' need for his own Lord of the Rings series. I have a friend who used to work over there, and Bezos came into the newsroom and said, "Where's my Lord of the Rings?" And it was definitely not Transparent or Man in the High Castle. That being said, Roy Price, he had a good run, and then he moved on. But he was looking at sort of the ratings of movies that have come out over the last several years and suggests they don't make them like they used to. But talk a little bit about what he's doing.
Well, he has a new newsletter out, a Substack called Price Point. He's a smart guy who grew up in Hollywood and has a lifetime perspective of the place. And he got kind of analytical about it and crunched the data. If you don't like Rotten Tomatoes, you use IMDb ratings, which I think are on a 1 to 10. And he looked at movies that just rated an 8 in terms of quality over a 10-year period from 2014 to 2024.
Now, is that to put it in Charlie Sheen terms, is that an LA 8 or is that like a Des Moines 8? Because I think that's really important.
But it was a kind of a numerical exercise to prove that the quality of movies has slipped.
As evaluated by people who chime in on these things on IMDb. Yeah,
right.
Okay, that's probably as valid as anything in terms of at least a fairly accessible, fairly broad data set, right? So,
right, yeah, it's hundreds of titles, and you're able to sort of year after year, there are fewer and fewer 8s as time goes on. You put a little.
That was not the case in Paris, I just want to say. But that being said, moving on. Hey, Avatar 2 gets a little run in theaters this week. It made $2.3 billion, and I guess they're going to squeeze another few nickels off of probably some IMAX screenings and stuff for folks. I would suggest if you Have a spare $3,500. Who doesn't? Watch Way of the Water on Apple TV Plus on your headset, on your Vision Pro, where you are in the water. Or at least go over to Apple and say, show me the Way of the Water demo for 5 minutes. And he'll go, oh, wow, okay, now I get Vision Pro. It's kind of cool. But they're hoping to goodness that when Avatar 3, which is Fire and Ash,
I
shows
hate to
up on
ask this,
December
but when did 2 come out?
3 years, 2.5 years ago.
And it grossed
I have to
over
look it up.
$1 billion
It's been 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
I mean, the first one came out and I think it was 2010, 2010, and it was a sensation. It drove this sort of the retro craze, and you knew it was there. I remember going,
Everybody went blue.
but it took Jim Cameron a long time.
Well, 2022 is when the second one came out. So 3 years ago.
That's an impressive business performance, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So 2.9 on the first one, 2.3 on the second one. Disney has put aside a prodigious amount of resources to 3, 4, and I think 5 over the next few years. At some point, Cameron's going to be like 900 years old. He's going to need to have an avatar for him. And he's the kind of tech geek. He's a fascinating director in so many ways with his technology. Do you know, this is really interesting. I was at a conference up in Santa Barbara, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, and he was showing some of the video they did, not just around the Titanic and what they used around the Titanic, but they created technology like a diving bell for cameras, these high-res cameras, special diving bell. So it could go down in high pressure areas to go down and explore these volcanic vents on the floor of the ocean and capture the sea life, the unique sea life around these vents, these volcanic vents as they bubble up. And, they're high in sulfur and they're much hotter than the surrounding blackness. And it's kind of cool stuff. But the fact that he and his brother were engineering this stuff, he's a brilliant, brilliant
Listen,
filmmaker.
I'm a fan. I'm glad I never married him, but
Yeah, Catherine Bigelow's down with you on that one. Yeah.
but a brilliant filmmaker. It's own shit, but and I feel like since Titanic, Avatar's not chopped liver. I really enjoyed it. I think, and he's certainly been innovating cinema technology
30 years,
rapidly
40 years now.
over 30 years. I wish he would do one more original film that I want to see before he does decide to retire, besides Avatar.
I understand the siren call of, hey, we made $2 billion on each of the first two. Let's get the gang back together.
It's not like
I totally get that. It's like there's nothing else out there making $2 billion these days. They broke up what's left of the Marvel team. I don't know when the next Marvel movie that matters comes out. And that's the only things that have been in the ballpark with those two Avatar films and Titanic in terms of box office over the last 20 years. So it'll be interesting to see what he's doing. But December 19th, it comes out. That's way late in the year. And I don't think it'll do much to save what's been a pretty mediocre box office in theaters this year. They had a really good start to the summer, and then that petered out. They were hoping to get to $4 billion for the summer. Did not get there. There's not a lot between now and really Avatar, but there's not a lot that's going to drive big box office between now and then. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens for the part of Hollywood that really depends on a big hit to help drive revenue. So
Let's get back to sports on TV. You wrote a little bit about that.
I did write a little tiny bit. It's let me just say, when you have a 9-hour time difference between your Trojans and a 7-hour time difference between your Mizzou Tigers, sometimes those games at dawn or deep night really run at weird times in the continent. And it's like, I remember, I think it was the Purdue game for USC. It didn't start till 8, and then they had multiple rain delays. I woke up at like 5 a.m. in Paris, and I'm looking at my phone on the Apple Sports app, which is great because it has these little it has a play-by-play little summation of what's going on in the game live, and it updates it as you go. And that's as close as I'm going to get to seeing the game from there at 5 a.m. So it's really hard to be a fan.
The USC game this week, big new kickoff is noon on the East Coast, but it's 9 a.m. And
yeah,
that's pretty early for a traditional Pac-12 fan.
Right.
And
After
I
they've
thought,
already flown across 2 time zones to get to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which I have to say, in the cornfields of central Illinois, a spectacularly great university, land-grant university, but not close by and not easily accessible. So I'm sure they flew into the little airport and all that, but still.
as a guy who watches that team too, maybe you felt, I won't belabor it, but it was like Groundhog Day. I felt like I've seen that USC walk-off field goal loss 8 or 9 times now under the current coach, Lincoln Riley.
Well,
But
if you would just cut and paste that in every game broadcast, and you'll save yourself the trouble and the disappointment.
no
That's
defense, no game
my
clock
recommendation.
management. Anyway,
Put it on TikTok with Larry Ellison. It's going to be great.
that's for our fan podcast coming up next. We'll tell you where to find it.
Next.
But
I did see something. I'd heard about it in Europe. Obviously wasn't able to see it, but did see it on an ACC game. And it was so cool. So they actually take you behind the scenes when the replay officials are talking through a contested play. Somebody throws a flag and says, I think your call's wrong. And you can hear them talking it through about, yeah, we see this. I don't see that. I love that. Jimmy Traina over at Sports Illustrated said it's the most innovative sports TV thing to come along in years. And I think he's right because, particularly in an era that is overrun with gambling and conspiracy theories and suspicion that games are fake, hearing this is really good.
Betting, conspiracy theories. You've got Dave Portnoy. I hadn't sat down and really watched Big Noon Kickoff because my team hasn't been on it. But I'm the old man fisting the clouds. I get that.
Well, you and Portnoy both. Portnoy had some weird take. I can't even dredge it up now that, get over it, guys. It's like, this is the way it should be. It's like, just deal with it.
All meathead all the time for 4 hours.
I think that's a really good marketing line.
I interviewed David Hill, Rupert Murdoch's buddy, who designed the Fox Sports aesthetic for the NFL and has matriculated the college game. It's all like just, loud noises and I want that's like a video game, and
well, they're trying to appeal to a younger audience, right? So they're not necessarily trying to appeal to Dan. They're trying to appeal to a younger audience that maybe not. What?
The men's football's, it's an intellectual game to some extent. I'm not saying they have to get pointy-headed about it, but somewhere along the line, the Fox production crew met and said, Illinois lost 63-10 to Indiana last week. And let's just talk about the redemption story and how Brett Bielema brought this team back from they didn't believe in themselves, but he still believed in them. And they had to go back and start over again and throw the film away. It just I get it. It was a tough loss. It's part of the narrative. But with Kirk Herbstreit on ESPN, he just knows the game, and it's natural, and you get all sorts. It was actually a really interesting matchup between two very brilliant but flawed coaches whose flaws kind of matched each other. Riley's this creative genius quarterback whisperer who's undisciplined and doesn't know how to coach defense. And Bielema can coach defense all day.
It's Bielema, by the way. Bielema.
Right.
I spent time in Amsterdam. It's Bielema.
He's fantastic. But he's not the most explosively creative guy in the world. Great matchup. You could go to town, and Jackson would, and so would Herbstreit, and so would any competent announcer. But just, my God, they would kick it over to the sideline announcer, and she'd go, yes, so Brett, his daughter was so concerned about her father that she put a squirrel inside the refrigerator, and Brett was scared, but he said he made it through the week with the love of his family. So you lost a game, dude. Oh, anyway.
Well, you got to ramp up the drama, just like we do every week.
I know. Losing a game with that kind of environment, it scars you, David. It's like having to read about mid splits. I get it.
It does. It's got to head back and look at my mid and high splits. Anyway, that's the last time anyone's associated splits of any kind with me. That being said, I think this is probably a good time for us to wrap this puppy up, as we're both a little punch drunk from the vicissitudes of biological life. But we got through this in chipper form. I think our beloved producer will say we did okay, and hopefully our beloved audience will say the same. Thank you, Dan. See you guys next week.